Hey everyone, welcome to the Path to Pro series. My name is Jake Middleton, and in this video I chat with ex-professional player Mason, also known as Locus in the Smash community, and Tim Smithies from the Laro Esports Science Research Lab in Ireland. We chat about the importance of sleep for esports players, current sleep research, personal experiences, and how to improve sleep as an esports player. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. All right, welcome Tim and Mason. Thanks so much for being a part of the show and excited to chat with you all about sleep and esports. For those that may not know you, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what you do? We can go ahead and start with Mason.
Yeah, so I'm Mason or Locus. Either one's good with me. I started playing esports with Super Smash Bros. When I moved to British Columbia in about 2016. I played professionally for a couple years. I peaked at top 40 in the world for Smash 4, which was kind of cool. And through that, I got really interested in how people play and how people think when they play. So I got kind of more into the coaching side. And I've done coaching for a couple years now, and I'm currently taking school for counseling hypnotherapy because that's a cool tool that I think can help a lot of players.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Tim?
Yeah, so hi Thea. Thanks for having me on. I'm Tim. I'm a PhD student at the University of Limerick in Ireland. I'm currently doing my research in the Esports Science Research Lab, which is the first dedicated research lab in Europe. And the lab's situated in Laro, which is the Science Foundation Ireland Centre for Software Research. I'm also funded by the Irish Research Council on an employment scheme with Logitech as the employment partner. My research topic is around sleep and its relationship with esport performance, and I would consider myself a casual Rocket League battler on the side as well.
Very nice. I play a little Rocket League. I dab a little bit as well. So yeah, like you said, the topic today is on sleep, and really would love to get both of your perspectives on how we can improve sleep in esports and for aspiring professional players. So I think a good place to start for this would be to get a sense of like why sleep is important for an esports athlete and why they should care. And so I'll go ahead and just let Tim start here, and then we can kind of just have a discussion on like why it's important for esports athletes.
Sure. I would just, I guess, firstly say that I think it's great, by the way, that you guys are dedicating a full month to sleep. I think it's a very important topic when we're talking about esports and just, I guess, well-being more generally. So I think it's great that you are dedicating the full month to it. In terms of esport performance, I would say that sleep impacts it and I'll cover it in a few different angles. Will directly impact performance in esports and indirectly. So first, when we're talking about esport performance, esports are very cognitively based activities, and there's a wealth of scientific literature out there that kind of links decreases in cognitive performance with sleep loss. So a very common one that's cited is there was a paper in the late 1990s that kind of equated I guess the performance effects of sleep deprivation, so not sleeping at all, to alcohol consumption or blood alcohol, and they found, and what they reported was that staying awake for 24 hours consecutively was the equivalent of being at 0.08 to 0.01 blood alcohol content, which I mean, for those who know what that feels like and are driving, I sure hope they don't feel like it's a good idea to drive under that. So it does definitely impact performance in that regard. And the opposite's true as well. So there's a really nice paper that was published in 2011 on sleep extension, or kind of encouraging players to sleep longer. This was in college basketball. And they found that free throw percentage and 3-point percentage increased by 9%, as well as sprint times as well. And all of that, while it's not directly on esports, and certainly that's a focus that we want to look at within the Esports Science Research Lab here, is kind of how does sleep loss and sleep extension directly impact esport performance. Everything within the literature, from kind of its effects on cognitive performance to its effects within sport, would lead us to believe that it does have quite a large effect. So there's that element there of how it directly affects performance. The other one, which is probably equally as important, is that sleep it will indirectly affect performance by affecting every kind of element that we try to optimize when we think of optimizing overall performance. So we're talking about diet, exercise, even practicing and kind of learning skills within the game, and then mood as well. Sleep has an impact to all of them. We sleep poorly, we tend to crave kind of higher calorie, fatty foods. The benefits that we get from exercise aren't as great. Sleep's integral in learning. So if we want to kind of get better in a game and learn more, it's important to be achieving optimal sleep. And when it comes to mood, if we're in a team sport and a couple of players are really irritable and feeling down, that's going to have a large effect on performance as well. So it's kind of there's that direct effect on performance, but then it affects every other element as well.
Yeah, so sleep, huge impact on performance. Obviously, there's not a lot of research in esports right now, but we know indirectly from other sports that it obviously can help improve performance. But if we're not getting enough sleep, it can really hinder it as well. Mason, based on like your experiences as a pro player and as a coach too, like have you seen this being a challenge with some of the players you've worked with, and also as a player, how did you go about kind of your own sleep hygiene?
Yeah, so this is something that's not talked about a lot in the Smash scene, and it's definitely something that needs a lot of work. Because everybody is traveling for these events, most stuff is offline. I feel like everybody's sleep schedule gets really thrown off when they travel to events. So that's one thing that people get, or people have trouble with, is when they're traveling, trying to manage sleep schedule. As far as like actually falling asleep for a lot of people is really, really hard, just being in different time zones. And when you're within North America, that's not too hard. But there was a time when I traveled to Germany for an event, and I'm getting in on a Friday, and I'm having to compete on a Saturday, Sunday, and it's a 12-hour time difference. And, you definitely feel the effects of that pretty quick. One interesting thing that I've ran into with players in Smash is that some people actually believe that when they sleep less, they play better, which is kind of like completely backwards. But it seems like for some of the players who are very emotional or overthink a lot, when they can't focus, it actually like helps them a little bit. So I've been like, my challenge has kind of been with those players to kind of show them that like, okay, you may feel like you're playing better when you're on low sleep, and you might actually like play a little bit better when you're on low sleep because of, you can't actually focus. But if we can get you past the overthinking and then get you sleeping properly, then you're going to be able to focus a lot better and actually figure out solutions to things while you're playing. So that's been a really interesting challenge that I've kind of ran into. I think the two main things it affects in Smash are just your ability to focus, because games are like 3 to 5 minutes long in general. So you kind of have to be very, very focused. Things move very fast for those 3 to 5 minutes. And then besides that, some of the tournament days are like 10 to 12 hour long days. And if you aren't sleeping properly and you're trying to kind of like keep a good competition mindset for 10 to 12 hours, you're just going to burn out by hour 6, hour 7. And I've ran into a lot of players that were just like, yeah, like I feel like I couldn't keep going. And I'm like, well, I know you slept like 3 or 4 hours last night. So yeah, it's definitely something that hasn't been touched on too much in the Smash scene. And I'm glad that, I have this opportunity to talk about it, because I think it could help a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's really important to get this information out there. And I think you bring up a lot of really good points, especially about like the travel and sleeping before competitions. As we know, sleep's really important, but there may be some sort of confirmation bias going on with players who are not getting as much sleep and thinking that they're playing better. But I'm interested. So like for players that might be listening, like what are some strategies that they could do to improve their sleep at a competition? Maybe the days leading up to it, or maybe the night beforehand. What are your guys' thoughts on this? And I'll kind of just like open this up to the both of you.
Yeah, I'll kind of defer to Tim here. I think he probably knows better strategies around sleep than I do. This would be stuff that I'd love to teach my students, though.
Sure. I would say that unfortunately, there's no kind of sexy answer here. There's no magic bullet to it. And really, the kind of tried and tested strategies are probably ones that most people have actually already heard and have chosen to ignore. You mentioned sleep hygiene before, but that is really kind of the critical idea. So I would say as well, just on the topic, I guess you mentioned optimizing sleep in a couple of days in the lead in to a tournament. And what I would argue is probably much more important is just in general optimizing sleep. Some players might get nervous the night before a game, and it's not uncommon, especially within the kind of sport world, for players to not sleep as well the night before a game, especially individual sport within individual sports. And that's nowhere near as big of a problem if your regular sleep is if you're on top of your regular sleep. So that would be the first point of call. Talking about sleep hygiene, so that we'd be talking about kind of the sleep habits and the sleep practices and attitudes as well that kind of that we have. So I guess a very important one would be to have a routine, have a pre-bed routine where you're trying to avoid any stimulating activities, say an hour before bedtime. So that would include for esport athletes, it'd be playing the actual playing games. For a researcher like myself, it might be avoiding checking emails an hour before bed, or something that could be stimulating or kind of anxiety inducing. Bedroom environment, so we want to have a cool, dark room when we're trying to sleep. Kind of recommendations are usually around 17 to 20 degrees Celsius or 63 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit for kind of a bedroom temperature. So staying on top of those kind of things, making sure our bedroom's not too cluttered. Again, these are things that most people are aware of, or have, if they're not aware of, they have heard at some point or another, but are quite often dismissed. And those rarely are the key factors when it comes to staying on top of our sleep.
So you're saying there's not like a sexy pill I can just take and then my sleep will be good?
No, I mean, I'd love there to be one. I'd love to have it. I'm interested in the
$1 million idea right there.
I'm not a fantastic sleeper to begin with, so I'd love it if there was one. But no, unfortunately not. Not that I'm aware of.
It's not the reality. But yeah, you bring up a lot of really great points there on how you can improve your sleep. And I agree with your point. From what I've learned is like, at least the week leading up, or maybe a few days, if you can focus on getting some good sleep there, getting one bad night of sleep right before the competition is not going to affect you as much. But if you're not getting good sleep leading up to it, then you're really not going to potentially be in the best state of mind for performance. So I guess we kind of talked a little bit about like the consequences of sleep, but I'm also curious just to know a little bit more about like what's going on in the body as well. I know there's things like memory consolidation. It's a time where the brain actually cleans itself too. For players that might not be aware, like, can you explain a little bit more of like what these processes are, and then why it's so important for not only their performance but for their development of their skills?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure that a lot of listeners have heard about the kind of stages of sleep or sleep phases. So we've got non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep, and then rapid eye movement sleep. And so basically what happens is within a night of sleep, we kind of progress through these stages where we start at very light sleep. And then as the night goes on, we move into heavy sleep, and then we move into what we call REM sleep. And all these stages are kind of considered to serve different I guess functions. The kind of sleep that we would say would be most beneficial from an esport athlete standpoint would be what we call deep sleep, or it'd be stage 3 non-REM sleep. And this is kind of where recovery happens throughout the day. So obviously just by being awake and doing the activities that we do throughout the day, it is very taxing on us, both our mind and our body. And so the recovery usually takes place in that time, as well as kind of memory consolidation, as you alluded to, as well. In regards to how sleep can maintain performance, that's a bit more of an open question, where there are many theories on how kind of sleep directly impacts performance, and there's no kind of clear cut consensus there, other than it does. There obviously are some theories out there, but there's some kind of good ideas that are out there. But certainly it is very important. And again, it's that kind of stage 3 non-REM sleep, or what we call deep sleep, that seems to be the most important when it comes to kind of recovering and optimizing performance.
So you heard it. Everybody get their deep sleep every night. But Mason, like you talked about with the traveling and stuff, I'm curious, like as a player, like what did you do over time to kind of like help with maybe dealing with those kind of long days where you're competing and trying to get in that mindset? Was it kind of something you learned over time, or were there different kind of strategies that you used?
Yeah, it was definitely something that I learned over time. I feel like in the Smash community, it's just kind of like pitfall after pitfall after pitfall when it comes with sleep, and you have to learn how to deal with each of them. So like one of the pitfalls of Smash when it comes to sleep is that a lot of the times the sponsors for these events are energy drink sponsors, and we love them for supporting us, and it's great. But when you're an 18, 19-year-old kid traveling on your own for an event, and people are handing out free energy drinks, you're like, wow, they're giving out free stuff. Like, yeah, of course. Like, I'm just going to take this.
Mm-hmm.
But like very quickly find out that like, yet again, it's going to just cause you to crash, and then you're not going to have good sleep like during the night. So that's one of the pitfalls I feel like I had to kind of just like, okay, I know it's free, but like, it's not worth it. Even though it's free. And then another one is, when we travel to events, because we have to travel, and a lot of us were quite young when we were traveling, it was like 4 to 5, sometimes like 6 or 7 people to a hotel room with like 2 beds. And it's like, okay, we're just not going to have that great of a sleep cramping that many people in the same room. Like somebody's on the floor with just like a blanket, like it's not going to go well. So kind of like, holding my sleeping arrangements to a little bit of a higher standard and saying, I'm going to get a hotel room for like me and another guy, and it's going to be the 2 of us. We have 2 different beds, and it's going to be fine. And then the other thing is just that there are a lot of players that really, really like to stay up super duper late and either practice or just play games and just like not really focus. And kind of knowing which players are the ones to kind of be like that and be able to say like, okay, we're going to go to bed at this time. If this isn't reasonable, like, I can, try and find somebody else to stay with. But like actually kind of like setting some boundaries there and some guidelines to make sure that, we're going to go to sleep at a reasonable time, and it's not going to be 3-4 a.m. and we're still playing games and we have to compete at 9-10 a.m. the next morning. So it's kind of been a conglomeration of experiences for me, just coming over those pitfalls.
Gotcha. And thank you for that. Like I actually used to, back when I would compete, you'd be at the hotel room and you'd probably play late into the night, and then you're playing in the morning, you're playing throughout the day, and it's just not the best way to set yourself up. Although I think a lot of times we think that that's actually helping us, we're actually in a lot of ways it's probably hindering us.
Mhm.
But
RJ,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, I come from a background of piano. I've been playing piano my whole life since I was very young, and I competed in that. And one thing that my mom kind of instilled into me, she was a piano teacher, and she kind of told me that like, you're not going to practice really, really hard the night before or the day of a competition. Like you're not going to have time to practice. Like we're just going to, give you the time to like mentally just kind of reset before you compete. And I felt like that was something that was really, really good for me and probably helped my sleep, because I'm not staying up super late practicing or getting up really early to practice before the competition. But also I think can be transferred over to esports quite well. Where if you're like practicing really, really hard the night before and staying up till 3 or 4 a.m., it's probably a little bit counterproductive. And the same goes if you're cutting your sleep the other way and waking up quite early.
Yeah, you're learning, and your kind of your development of your skill has probably happened well before that night before or that day of. So yeah, one thing I'm fascinated, I'm very interested in. I think it's a great development within kind of the traditional sport world over the last 5 or 10 years, and is the idea of kind of planning for these long distance travel periods, and kind of finding ways to mitigate jet lag as much as possible. And kind of everything that you're describing here is fascinating. Fascinating to me. I think it's very good. I think it's a very interesting field, and it's certainly somewhere where I think post pandemic, when all the lands start to come back and people are traveling to these events, it's one place in which teams can really start to actually get an edge over other teams by being more professional in this regard. Have you, or were you kind of given any advice, be it from a coach or a manager, or any kind of team structure on ways to I guess mitigate jet lag, or maybe best times to travel, best times to receive sunlight, avoid sunlight, or any of that kind of information at all during your playing days?
Yeah, no, not at all. Like I think the Smash community, it's pretty grassroots as far as things go. So there's a lot of there's just not that much info for players. And nobody really takes their health that seriously, which is part of why I kind of got into this. I kind of saw the need for that in the Smash community, and I kind of wanted to be an advocate for it. So yeah, there was almost nothing. And I feel like it's especially important because it's like a lot of either like very young adults, or sometimes even like kids competing in these events. Like some of the best players in the world are like 15, 16 years old, but they're like burning themselves out physically and mentally just repetitively when they compete at these events. So I think it'd be great to have, some of these resources a bit more readily available, instead of kind of just throwing these kids into an environment where it's like, yep, long days and energy drinks, make it work, which is kind of the environment right now.
Unfortunately, yeah. And I think that brings up a really good point, is like, for professional players who are on professional teams that do have support staff, like a sports psychologist, a physical therapist, a nutritionist, they can really get a lot of this support. And there are, of course, challenges there working with players on that level. But the vast majority of players at the college, high school, amateur level, they don't really get this kind of support. And like you had said, they don't really have access to these kinds of resources. And there's just really not that culture yet that you kind of see in like traditional sports, where you have that kind of pipeline from, youth sports to high school to college to pro. There's a lot of infrastructure built around that. And I think esports is eventually getting to that point, but curious to get your all thoughts on like, how do you think players could get more support and get bought into these things when they don't really have access to it?
Yeah, so I think the first step is just by kind of having these sort of conversations, right? I think that we're not going to get any players bought into this without them knowing that it's an issue. And I think for a lot of people in the Smash community, at the very least, they just don't really think there's a problem with what's happening,
Hmm.
just because that's the normal. So I think just having these conversations and doing what we've been doing and what you guys have been doing with pushing this whole sleep month, I think is fantastic, because I think players need to know that it's a big deal. um, After that, I think it's a little bit more dicey as far as how we can get, so many people the resources they need. But I think awareness is a great first step.
Completely agree with that.
And I'd say that like I would hope as well as kind of as esports continues to grow, that does become a lot more available to players. The one thing I would say to people who are, I guess, already within the esports world, and maybe don't see issues such as sleep as big of a deal as maybe they should be, is that perhaps they should look at kind of, I guess, the other occupations that are out there in the world that, or the most similar occupations. So I'd say looking at athletes would be a good start, in the sense that they have to kind of perform at key moments, at key times, often cognitively very demanding tasks. But then you can look past that to I guess, occupations such as pilots. Air traffic controllers are a very good one, who kind of operate using screens. They have to kind of constantly be able to shift their attention. Good, efficient communication, which is a key component of a lot of team sports. There's a lot of similarities between these occupations, and sleep and kind of fatigue management is absolutely at the forefront of these occupations. Absolutely at the forefront. And so there's a reason why that's the case. And maybe, so I would say maybe to people who are already within esports is military as well, having to perform key decisions and kind of cognitively demanding tasks. Sleep is at the absolute forefront of kind of human factors research in military as well. So I'd say, yeah, there's a reason why that's the case.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I think that's a great point. One thing that like kind of scares me with that though is I feel like people think about professional athletes. They don't think about, it's just not talked about enough, even as far as like professional athletes and that sort of thing goes. When you look at somebody like Michael Phelps, your thought isn't immediately like, oh man, I bet you he's got a real nice pillow. Like, his room probably isn't, the perfect temperature for sleeping. You're like, dang, I wonder how much he's practiced. So that's what people go to. And then they just repetitively go over it again and again and again, and kind of lead themselves into burnout. So I think it'd be really cool if some of these more professional fields also kind of, started building awareness about it for their athletes too. But yeah, that's a smaller thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think like the awareness point, I completely agree with that. Like that's really where it starts right now. Esports is still so young, right? That we still have a long ways to go. But I think the education, like you had talked about, Tim, as well, is really going to help to increase the awareness. So having this call, I think all of the work that we're trying to do right now, from the research to coaching and everything else that we do, is really going to help hopefully expedite all of these processes. But to get a little bit more into like sleep strategies and how much we should be getting, I guess I'd love to hear like what's your guys' nighttime routines like, and how much sleep is recommended for high performance?
I would start by saying I'm quite a do as I say, not as I do person. I'm probably not as good when it comes to it as I should be. I do have routines, so I do, again, as I said, I try to avoid stimulating activities 45 minutes before bed. I would say an hour would be better, but I do try 45 minutes before bed, and I do try to kind of keep my room as inviting as I possibly can. I make sure that it's cool before I go to sleep. I have it as dark as possible. A big one for me, I'm very sensitive to caffeine, so I would avoid caffeine. I try to avoid caffeine 8 hours for my my ideal bedtime. And I would definitely recommend to people to do so, or at the absolutely 6 hours before their ideal bedtime. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 hours, meaning that 5 hours after you ingest caffeine, it's still half of it still in your system, and obviously caffeine works to reduce sleepiness. So it's a good thing to be avoiding that kind of anywhere near bedtime. So those would be kind of my own personal strategies. Again, it goes back to the sleep hygiene, and it goes back to making sure your room's as inviting of a kind of environment to achieve sleep. One thing I didn't mention earlier, which I've actually thought about now when you asked what I did, is one more thing I try to do is avoid doing any activities, or try to avoid my time in bed that I am not sleeping as much as possible. So that's scrolling on my phone in bed, or watching movies in bed. I guess I don't want to. I want to keep that association between my brain and my bed to be sleeping rather as much as possible, and kind of removing as many things as I can that aren't sleeping from bed is only going to be a good thing as well.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the things that I do are somewhat similar. One thing that I've kind of run into, especially during quarantine, I feel like I had a pretty big wake up call. Is just how important getting like some form of physical activity it is during the day to your sleep. There was a period of time where I was like, I wasn't having very good sleeps, and I was busy doing coaching and stuff during the day, and I was like, why am I not getting that much sleep? And I made sure to like go out and get like a nice long walk or a jog in, and it was definitely that. So that's one thing that I've kind of put into my daily routine. Obviously, not immediately before bed, but sometime during the day, just so that your body's got something going. Um, and then another pitfall that I've kind of had to deal with is not so much like falling asleep, but just staying in bed for too long after I wake up. So I try and schedule myself stuff during the mornings to kind of like force myself to get up. I wish I just kind of had the motivation to do it, but I'll schedule myself a coaching session or something at like 10 or something and just make sure that I'm up at that point. And then I am just up and I'm ready to kind of go about my day after I've done that. And then besides that, it's all of the other kind of things like making sure I'm not having caffeine, super early before bed. Um, I'm pretty temperature sensitive when it comes to sleep. Um, so kind of like controlling the temperature of my room, opening my window, that kind of thing. Um, I kind of have like a um, routine as far as like I keep my window open for this long. I can kind of feel it starts to get cool enough. I close it to a certain amount. If it's not cold enough, I like turn on a fan and point it towards the window. Like I feel like I'm very temperature sensitive. So I do some of that kind of stuff too to just regulate the temperature so it's good for sleep.
Very cool. A lot of great points there. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
It's a good point you raise about exercise. And I'd add one more thing to that as well as if you can exercise outside, that's absolute paramount.
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely good, and the reason for that is getting as much kind of natural light as you can throughout your day is very very important, particularly in the morning as well. Kind of it helps calibrate all your body systems. You have a bodily rhythm, a 24-hour rhythm. We call it the circadian rhythm. And the biggest factor that governs that is light, and natural light is a much stronger kind of calibrator than any other light we can get. So kind of achieving that throughout the day. Exercise is another one of those factors, and if we can do that outside, that's all the better.
Yeah, again, such good points that you guys bring up. One I really want to talk about more about is the blue light, particularly getting natural light, but also, of course, from electronic screens. Blue light is artificially emitted from that. And social media, like, scrolling through social media. We know players, the generation we have now, everyone uses social media. So, and I think it really impacts not only sleep, but can impact our performance as well. When you're looking at maybe social media in between matches and things like that, we know decision fatigue can add up. But I'm curious, like, what kind of strategies that players could utilize, or what that you guys might utilize to help to kind of like avoid blue light and not make it affect your sleep.
Yeah, sure. One thing, so I would caution against immediately going out. There's a lot of blue light blocking glasses that are commercially available. I would probably, to be honest, caution. There's no issue in going out and getting them, but I don't necessarily think they are very necessary. I would say that one resource in regards to this, which is great, and it's great because it's absolutely free. There's a program called f.lux, which everyone can get, and it basically changes your screen in the same way that a blue light blocking glasses would do so. Kind of changes the amount of blue light that's emitted from your screen, so you can set it to an ideal wake time, and it will change it as it goes there. The other part that I would say is that while blue light certainly is something we have to be concerned about, I would also say that just the stimulation from playing kind of video games late at night, the they're designed to be stimulating, right? The video games are designed to draw us in, to keep us engaged and to be stimulating, and that absolutely is a big factor. Especially if you're playing them late at night. It's like watching the most exciting action movie ever and then trying to get to sleep straight after. It's going to be very difficult too. So that is another factor to consider as well. Again, with blue light blocking glasses, if you feel you can get a benefit from them, certainly. But there are also free resources available that do a similar thing.
Free things are always good.
Kind of piggybacking off of that. I think one thing that happens a lot in the Smash community is brackets for tournaments will come out like variably like a day before the event, sometimes in the morning of. But what'll happen with a lot of people is they'll get bracket like in the evening before the event, and they'll be like, okay, this is my path. These are the players I'm going to have to play. And then like it's right before bed and they're on their phone watching YouTube videos of the player that they're afraid of playing against, like trying to diagnose their habits and trying to look for like things that they can expose them for and things that they can get an edge on. And that just takes a lot of conscious brain power. And doing that, and then, maybe spending an hour or 2 hours on that and putting yourself in a situation where you're like, okay, I'll get like 6 hours of sleep. But then not taking into consideration that like after doing that for those 2 hours, like your brain's not going to be ready for sleep immediately. And then you're either, worried about who you're going to play the next day so you can't sleep, or whether it's just that you've done a lot of conscious thinking. Either one is just gonna hurt your sleep there.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier of like kind of the cramming. Like we just like in like a test, we kind of try to cram in right before, this is the opponents, like you had said, you find out. So what strategies can I use to beat them? Just like in a test, like I'll stay up all night and I'm just going to study for it and then I'll take the test. But we know that that's just not the best thing that we could do. It's so much better to probably get the sleep. And of course, ideally we want to space out our training, but that's really what we do, right? Like you had said, Tim, you've trained, you've put in the hours, you are ready to go, as ready as you can. So might as well allow yourself to be able to do that with trying to get at least a decent night of sleep. Really good stuff here. I think another thing I wanted to chat about was when it came to like sleep quality, because we've talked about sleep quantity a little bit, but and we've mentioned some things like bedtime ritual, stuff like that. But like, what other things can players do to like improve their sleep quality if they have trouble falling asleep?
So if I guess to be boring, again, I would go back to sleep hygiene as being absolutely paramount. So the points that I've mentioned before. So a cool, dark room, avoiding activities as much as we can in bed, and those kind of things. When it comes to sleep quality specifically, another one that could come up is alcohol use. There's a belief that to some people that alcohol might actually help people fall asleep because for whatever reason. But rarely kind of the quality goes through the window goes out the window when it comes to alcohol use and caffeine use for that matter. Even if we do start achieving sleep, and we've been using caffeine shortly before, the quality of sleep isn't going to be as near as good. Again, to be boring, it does though go back to kind of the common tips that a lot of people's mums would have given them when they're kids, and they didn't quite listen to, myself included, for many years. So it does quite simply come to those kind of things, and then above all, just consistency. Consistent bedtimes, consistent wake times, consistently receiving light shortly after wake, and that kind of thing are really building up good habits in that regard.
Is there any way to tell it's kind of like how you feel? Is there any way to tell like what kind of quality of sleep that you've had?
I mean, our subjective recollections, or I guess our subjective alertness, if you would, how alert you feel, or the flip side to it is how sleepy you'd feel, do tend to be quite good. So that would be a very good first indication. Now, I'll put a caveat to that. They do tend to be quite good when we have generally been sleeping pretty well. If we have consistently been sleeping poor, then we tend to overestimate our abilities. And then also if it's kind of biological night. So if you ask me at 3 a.m. How sleepy I feel, there's a high likelihood that that's not going to correlate with how I perform. But I would say generally kind of you can tell through subjective recollection.
Gotcha.
Also, what comes up here is like, if I were to have a bad night of sleep, like what can I do the next day to kind of like, I guess, try to get myself into a better performance mindset? Like, is taking a nap, is that something that's going to be like the most helpful potentially?
Certainly that could be a benefit. Naps could definitely be a benefit. One thing I would be cautious with when it comes to naps is timing them too close to or like kind of having them too close towards time of competition. So there's what we call sleep inertia, or kind of like your grogginess after you wake. So for the first 10 minutes or so after you wake, there's kind of grogginess and impedance of performance is often associated with it. And for naps, that can quite often be larger than just a regular sleep itself. But certainly, as long as you time it right, naps would be a very good strategy. Kind of strategic caffeine use can be very beneficial as well. Again, I'd caution that with strategic, and then there's a kind of movement within traditional sports anyway to combine the two. So caffeine's effects generally aren't noticed until about 45 minutes to an hour after ingestion. So there's researchers, and I know some professional sport teams have been utilizing strategies as well, where they're kind of saying, have some caffeine, have a cup of coffee, go to sleep straight away. By the time you wake up, the caffeine would have kicked in. So that's another potential avenue that or another kind of potential mitigation strategy that's out there as well.
Do you use any nap strategies, Mason?
No, I find that I have a very hard time falling asleep in places that aren't like super familiar to me. So when I'm at competitions and stuff, I tend to not be able to like nap in times that aren't like sleep times. But I know that there are a lot of competitors that do. Like they'll have a pool for like a couple of hours, and then top 48 or something will be in a couple hours, and they'll take a hour, half hour nap in between, and then they'll go and they'll compete afterwards. So definitely something that I'd look to if you're struggling with that.
That's something you brought up too. I'm sure you know this, Tim. I listened to Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and it was so interesting how whenever we're sleeping in a new environment, our full brain isn't actually going to sleep. In some ways, it's like half of our brain. And so I think that, again, it goes back to that point of like, you're probably not going to get the best sleep being in a hotel in a new place, the night before a competition, especially with all the nerves. So again, trying to get the best sleep you can leading up to the competition is going to be more helpful. And then hopefully that takes some pressure off too, as a player, that, you don't have to get as best of sleep, but still trying to do so.
So Mason, sorry, just really quickly, Mason raised a really good point there, that some people can do that just fine. Other people can't. And it's important to be aware of how you sleep yourself, and kind of, so I know I'm much the same. I struggle to sleep in new environments, as well. And so I guess for me, if I was in that similar situation, as you said, Jake, it'd be very important for me to kind of optimize my sleep in the days and weeks leading up to a competition like that, so that I know that if I do happen to get a couple of poor nights of sleep, that's not going to affect me that much. So I guess it's about being aware about your own of your own body and of your own sleep habits as well.
Yep, awareness definitely key for anything. It's the first step. And like for myself, like I'm actually training for an Ironman in a couple months from now, and so really trying to lock in on my sleep. And I found, like you talked about, that sleep consistency, going to bed same time each night, waking up at the same time each morning. Like that's been the best thing to improving my sleep quality. And I find that like I'm actually falling asleep faster, which was something I always kind of had trouble with, was just like falling asleep initially. And so definitely very, very important for any player, whether you're traveling or whether you're not. But kind of coming to the end of the conversation here, is there anything else that you guys would like to chat about or to bring up?
One thing that I'm curious about, and Tim, if this isn't something that you've done any research on, that's totally okay. But I'm a person that has nightmares quite often. And it seems that like any amount of like anxiety or any amount of pressure from something kind of like triggers those. Like even last night I had like a pretty bad one just thinking about the podcast, and I'm not super nervous about the podcast, but like it's something that I am kind of aware of with myself. Have you done much research with those, or do you have any solutions for people who experience that kind of thing?
I wouldn't personally be confident enough to comment. Nightmares are a criminally under researched topic. No, seriously, a criminally under researched topic in terms of how much distress they can actually bring to people versus how much we as a scientific community seem to care about them. It is criminally under researched. I did listen to a very good a webinar. The name escapes me. He was a British guy, and what I can maybe do is I can send you over at least his name and a couple of the resources that he has, if that would be helpful, and maybe even potentially get in touch with him. He's an interesting guy. He's an ex-military, and we know within military populations nightmares are very, very high. So he's a very interesting guy, and he's got quite a few fascinating resources. So I can maybe point you in that direction, but I personally wouldn't feel confident enough to really comment on that.
Yeah, that's super reasonable. But yeah, I would really appreciate those kind of resources, not only just for myself, but for passing along to other players too. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Again, it's a strange one. It's a very, for how much kind of they can actually can distress and affect people's lives. It's an under researched topic for sure. So yeah.
Great stuff, guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. A lot of really good information. Want to thank you for your time coming in on the show and having this chat. Just for people who, so they can find you at online, Twitter, YouTube, things like that. Feel free to share.
Yeah. So I'm Locus SK on basically everything. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's Locus SK. It's Locus SK on YouTube, Locus SK on Twitch. I'm most active on Twitter. So if you're looking for me, or if you're wanting to schedule a coaching session, you're going to find me there the quickest and the fastest.
And Twitter again would be the best way to get in contact with me. It'd be T_Smithies. Our lab also has a Twitter handle, so that would be Esports SRL, and through that Twitter handle, you'll be able to find I guess all the researchers that are involved in the lab. There's Dr. Mark Campbell and Dr. Adam Toth, who are kind of managers of the lab as well. Their Twitter handles would be available through there. So definitely say follow that. We're trying to grow that and sharing a lot of kind of the interesting research that's taking place in the lab and also in the wider kind of esports community as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you all enjoyed this video. Shout out to Mason and Tim for the insights on sleep and esports. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more Path to Pro series videos coming up each month.